Hi, I'm Dave Comery. I'm a land surveyor, and the highest and best use for my business is knowing your boundaries.
Thanks for tuning into the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast, the show where we talk about techniques to optimize your land, structure, skill sets, and time, as well as other highest and best use principles to make your business more profitable, productive, and efficient. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. And today, Dave Comery from IBW Surveyors is on the show. Dave, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
I'm so excited.
To invite me.
So Dave and I have actually been working together for a long time, and it's really good to actually put a face to a name.
Yeah, you too. Absolutely.
This has been fun.
It's been a while. Time flies.
Yeah, it does. So 3 quick points about you. You're the co-owner of IBW Surveyors.
Yes.
Right? You're a licensed Ontario land surveyor for how many years now?
25 now.
25 years. How many projects do you figure you've completed over those 25 years?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Thousands.
Thousands of projects. So
Yep.
we're going to go deep today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more and more every year it seems. So.
Yeah. How many projects do you have on the go at any one time, typically?
Typically, I have about 100 or so on the go.
Just you personally,
Me
or
personally, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's crazy.
around that, some of them last a few months, and some of them are quicker, some of them are longer. So,
True.
So that's the thing. I'm notorious for having the most open projects in our company, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast, which you're well aware of.
I am aware of. Yes.
Time it doesn't go fast.
It's
sometimes.
all time. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so on today's show, and before we get into who IBW is and what you guys do,
Yep.
3 quick key points that I want to cover today. So what is a land surveyor? What do they do? Let's talk about what that means. Okay. Number 2, the surveying process and how it works. Let's break that down. And then number 3, the technical side of things. I've got a nice laundry list of the technical side of surveying, stuff that maybe is less talked about unless you're really like right deep in the thick of it. So I'd like to dive into that and take it from there. Sound good?
It sounds great.
All right. So IBW, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so IBW, we're a local land surveying company based here in Bowmanville. We've been basically the same company since the early 60s, and we've grown quite a lot in the last number of years. Now we have up to 7 offices now, and we stretch from Parry Sound through to Cornwall.
7
And we
offices.
have just over 150 people working for us. So.
Oh my goodness. And you guys have acquired over the years.
Yes. Yeah. Our industry is aging like a lot of other professions. And we've taken advantage of people that are retiring and don't have the best plan. And they're buy them out and continue on. So
Interesting. What
it's
does
been
that
very
look like?
good.
Does a surveyor or does a surveying company have intellectual property that you acquire when you purchase the business, or what does that mean?
Yeah, I would say the normal things are the typical what clients they work with is one thing, and then the other important part with surveyors is their records. So the history of all the survey that they've done.
That's not public.
No, yes and no. Some is public and some is not.
Interesting.
Some surveyors offer to sell those plans, those historical plans, and there's a number of websites that are easy to access.
Yeah.
That some are advertised on the radio, which is kind of interesting.
No way.
So, I don't know if you've heard
So when you acquire those surveys, how does that? So then you own the survey. So when somebody goes to one of those websites, like you're saying, and buys it, you get paid for that.
Yeah, we
data?
sell those to the public in certain cases, but the main reason we're required to keep them for the historical records of what previous surveys were done and how the lines were created. So that's the number one thing, is the history of how the land was divided and how it was created. So that's what we're always trying to get back to. So that's why having all the records available to us is a big it's very important, and it's a big advantage to have a large cache of records. So
Wow. So what do you do if you don't own the record, but somebody else does? You buy it from them?
yeah, then the other surveyors have exchange of records, which they're required to provide the information they did previously, and you need to base your survey on that. So it's an important part of the process.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Cool. Okay, so I want to kick this off. What is a land surveyor? Let's define what it actually means to be a land surveyor and go from there.
Yeah, I'd say it's Ontario Land Surveyor is kind of a specific thing because you're required to have a license to practice, and it's similar to being a lawyer, except it deals with land. So we deal with the measurement of land, we deal with creating new parcels and retracing existing parcels.
Interesting. I find this so fascinating. It's it just feels like such an old world thing, but really it's evolved over the years into what it is now in a modern time.
Yeah,
like when we go back,
we call ourselves the oldest profession. So
I guess it's true.
The other one that you know of, they had to have a road to get to where they're going, so they needed the surveyor to mark that out first. So
how has that changed over the years from back in the days of measuring in chains to today? How has that changed?
I'd say in a lot of ways it's very similar to it was in the past. We just use different tools now. Our tools are a little different than dragging a metal tape or a metal chain, actual chain through the woods. Yep. To now we use satellites and measure between 2 points. So but really it's just the measurement tool is more modern, but what we're trying to do is the same.
Okay. So in terms of the actual process on what you are trying to do, obviously you're picking up points to say this is how big your lot is, right? But like, what do those tools look like?
Yeah, well, as far as the tools go, they're just the measuring devices. But the interesting part of surveying, at least for most people, is the history that's involved. Because what our job is to retrace the original running of the line. So we're trying to get the same position of the boundary that was created back in the 1800s when Ontario was settled.
Interesting.
So you can imagine they were using different tools and had different issues with either the men they worked with beat them up or got drunk on payday or weird things like that you read in the records that they have.
Yeah.
And so some of the issues that they had created problems when they put the lines in. So if you ever notice some of the roads locally, if you drive north, all of a sudden you jog 50, 100 feet and you go, why is that? Well, it's because the way that person surveyed it back in the 1800s, they would go one way and then they would turn around and go the other way. And if their chain broke, they'd lose some. They'd think they were measuring one thing and they weren't.
Yeah.
But our job is the interesting part is our job is to retrace those mistakes that were made. So where they thought they put it and where they actually put it are two different places.
Really?
But we're trying to establish where they put it.
So
first,
where they thought they put it, it's
boundary.
irrelevant.
Yes. That's right. It's where it was placed and where the property owner used the property line.
Oh.
So it's not just placing the monument, but it's the use of it. So that's why we use other evidence like fences and use of the property. Because if the monument's gone, because a lot of them at that time were old cedar posts. So they may have rotted away or anything like that. But
somebody ties their fence into the surveying post.
Some of the use of the property, they knew better than us where their property was 100 years ago because they knew where the stake was. Yeah. So now that stake's gone, the fence is the best evidence of where that stake was.
Wow, and that's
things
so
like that. So that's kind of what it is. And now we measure the distance that they laid out with a modern instrument, and we get a different number than what they thought it was because they were obviously dragging it through up and down hills and over water and whatever they were doing. But it's amazing how close it comes out sometimes. So
when you guys actually do the measurement, is it as the crow flies, or does it take into account, like if you got 100 feet of frontage, but there's a mountain in the middle of the 100 feet, the 100 feet may not be, like you'd have to go up and over the hill.
Yeah, so it's as the crow flies. And that's part of the errors that maybe the other surveyors had, is they would be going over the hill and not account for the slope or something like that.
Oh, interesting. Damn.
So some of that's but that's the interesting part, is you have to try to retrace where it was placed as opposed to where it said it was placed. Because if you looked at what their original field notes and plan looked like that they reported back to the king, it was a perfect square and
everything
all
was
straight.
Good. Yeah. So what happens if somebody moves a monument, or in that case, a fence post?
Yeah, well, that's the other part of it, is your job is to prove that it's in its original position. So some of the things that we do is the history, as I spoke earlier, is if you know that a line has been surveyed and then been surveyed again in 20 years and then been surveyed again, and you get a different measurement, you're likely to think that the monument has been disturbed because 4 other surveyors measured it in the same place, and you're measuring it at different. So is the monument now in its original position? Likely not. So,
and for the listeners, what does a monument look like?
yeah, so that's can vary. There's a modern one is a square iron bar, and there's usually two typical sizes. There's the 3/8 of an inch or 1 inch bars, and they're just steel in the ground, and usually they're under the sod, so usually you don't see them.
Yeah,
which is kind of
or your lawnmower finds them.
Or your lawnmower finds them, and you don't like that very much. But.
How do you locate those if you can't visually see them firsthand?
Yeah, so we have most of them are steel, so they use a magnetic locator to help us find them, and then a good old-fashioned shovel is the the best tool.
It's a blast. So I recently did that at one of the properties. I think you guys did the survey for me.
Yep.
And I'm walking around like a bonehead in the yard, trying to find like where the theoretical, where the monument is. I'm like, well, it says it's here. It should be here. And I'm looking around, and boom, sure enough, pops right up.
Yep.
Like these magnetic locators are so sensitive.
Yeah.
So sensitive.
Very much so.
It's impressive, really.
Yeah. And then the more modern ones, we have plastic bars now, which because of a lot of the locations of where we want to put the monuments, they're along the street line, which there's a lot of other infrastructure in there.
Oh, right.
So there's wires and things you don't want to hit. So
some of them have magnets on the top.
Yeah, so they developed a plastic bar, which won't hurt the infrastructure or less so. And then it has a magnetic piece in it so that you can find it.
Wow. Wow. Are they less expensive or more expensive than traditional iron?
The plastic ones now they're a lot cheaper than
that's good.
Than the steel with
and
the price
rot.
of steel.
And they don't rot.
Yeah.
How long would it take for, let's say, an iron bar, a 2-foot or a 4-foot bar, whatever, that went in the ground? How long would it take for that to actually rot away, such that you wouldn't be able to find it again if left undisturbed?
Yeah, the iron bars last for a long time. So, like I've seen ones that are been 100 years old that are still
really
good. So, even a cedar post we've found these days that were over 100 years old.
No way.
Yeah.
Huh.
Some of them, they rot and you could have to dig in the ground and kind of shave off to see the difference in soil. But it's a lot less likely since we're all resurveyed and redeveloped since the original township lots. But we still do find some. So.
And what would you do? Would you find the center of what used to be the cedar post, or would it be an inch?
Yeah, and then you measure that and see how it matches up with everything else. So.
Educational requirements to become a land surveyor. What does it look like?
You're required to have a degree, and then once you have that, then there's a number of specialized courses that you have to take, which are basically the laws in Ontario specific to surveying. And then once you're completed that, you're allowed to article, which we have Association of Ontario Land Surveyors that regulates us. And they set the requirements and there's a set of exams you have to write. And then once you have that, then you're able to be licensed.
How many hours would that take?
Yeah, it typically takes about 2 years is the quickest.
2 years.
Once you have your degree,
You'd be working full-time, 9 to 5 type of thing to get that? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, at IBW, we're fortunate. Right now, we have the most experienced surveyor in Ontario. So Ivan Wallace is still, he's our founder, and he is in his 80s. He still works with us.
Really?
And he's still practicing.
Oh, my goodness.
And his number, we're all given a license number. So his license is currently the earliest license number in Ontario.
It's the lowest. No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have one of our newest surveyors that just was licensed is also with us. So we have the newest and
that's a spread. You guys should promote that. You should get it put on T-shirts.
Yeah,
or something.
That's right. We should.
Like we're the oldest. We got it. We got it figured out.
We got everything in between.
Too funny.
So
okay, so let's talk about the process. So whether you're surveying a farm or whether you're surveying an infill lot or a subdivision, let's start with maybe how those differ, and then we'll talk about how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. The first step in every survey is the research, and that's researching first of all the title that's in the land registry office. So that's open to the public, and basically it gives you what the legal description of the property is and what legal rights there are associated with it.
Okay.
And then we move on to searching our internal records and other surveyors' records. So
all
then
all the ones that you own now.
Yeah. So then what we want to do is go back to when we find the survey that created the line.
Oh, wow.
And then we want to retrace back to that. So in most cases
that'd be like
now,
hand-drawn, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on what it is. But yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
In most cases now, it's a subdivision. So it's more a modern-looking plan like your typical would like to see. But that's what we're trying to find is where those original monuments were placed and then find them or retrace them based on other adjacent monuments. And then hopefully the property turns out to be the same size as we expected, which is the first most important thing for developing is to find out how much property you have and because sometimes the deed is different than what the actual surveyed limit is. So you may end up, if you have a 50-foot lot, according to your deed, the evidence may show that it's 49 feet, which can create a problem if you design to 50 feet and without a survey. So the key is to find out what you have first, and also what other interests there are or may be evident on the ground. Like if someone's been driving over a portion of the property and using it as their access, that can create a right in the property that they may have, and you may impact your development. So
even if it's not registered as an easement or something? Okay.
It can be unregistered. It's more of a legal question than a survey question, but our job is to notice on the ground what's there and point it out, and then your lawyer works with you with the title and says, oh, this person may have an interest in this because of the length of use or things like that. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you figure out the title, you figure out how big the lot is. What do you do next?
So then we would measure the size of the property and prepare a plan that illustrates those interests so that it shows the iron bars and the dimensions between them with heavy lines normally is the way the survey shows. And then we also include, depending on what the purpose is of the survey, the buildings or adjacent buildings, things like that, to show what the setbacks are and verify your zoning and all of those fun things.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're doing an infill lot, how is that maybe different from a farm or a forest? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'd say that most infill lots you're looking at, it's a smaller property, so it can be more straightforward. But then in a farm, there's a lot more historical evidence that could be involved, because normally it hasn't been surveyed for a longer time because it's not been divided yet.
Right.
So the farm, the fence rows along the property line, or the stones, or the use of the property there becomes very important.
What takes precedence? So let's say you can't find the monuments. You're out there in the field and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't find the monument. There's nowhere that you can triangulate from because those are missing or whatever. Like, what takes precedence? The stone rows or the fence, or somebody's opinion?
Yeah, sometimes it's the fence, and sometimes it is some other, like if you had the history of what the surveys showed. So if they found the monument in relatively recent history and measured to it, then that's probably more likely than the fence that maybe isn't an old fence, if you're not certain, to retrace the boundary. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes the fence, some interesting cases are when the fence is shown as a straight line because they only picked up maybe one or two points along the way, but that same fence is the limit and has been accepted as the limit. If you survey it and find there's a bend in it or there's a deviation, then that can create a bend or a deviation in your property line that you didn't think you had. So.
Just from a fence?
Yes.
Wow. And they say like 99% of fences aren't even on the lot lines. There was some study or something out there. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe in modern times.
Sure.
Because a lot of times now in modern subdivisions, there's less and less survey bars because of the way that we develop these days. So.
Interesting. So if you go to a farm and the fence is like, it's not really there, it's there, but it's questionable. And people have been clearly farming on either side of that fence, give or take a few feet. Would you interview an owner, like a landowner or a farmer?
Yes, that's the key is to find as much information out about the fence as you can. So that's part of were the owners using it? Did they put it there? Did they replace a fence that was in the same position? Did they move the fence? Did they put it there because the cows, or why did they put it there? All those information is what you're looking for. Certainly, we've had cases before where we found an old rail fence, and once we interviewed the owners, we found out that rail fence came from a property that was about 5 lots up, and he was getting rid of his rail fencing that looks really old and aged, and he just put it up last year. So
too funny.
So that old fence may not be an old fence. So It is important to speak to the owners and understand where that fence came from, because that's what the fence isn't. It's the best evidence of where the monuments were if they're lost, or can be. But you need to know about the fence to determine that.
This is blowing my mind, because I was always told, like, just from, like, as a general, but I'm doing mostly infill development, right?
Yeah.
I was always told, just as a general, you can never go by a fence, always find the monument, or find from somewhere else.
That's a good rule, absolutely.
Sure, but like if you're in the bush or out in the country, maybe that doesn't apply.
Quite possibly, yeah. But then there's lots of times where the fence was placed in convenience because it was at the top of the slope, and the owners always knew that they owned further. So that's the key. That's the key is what you're trying to retrace it to the best original evidence of where the monument was.
Yeah.
So if the fence had nothing to do with that, then it's not likely the evidence.
What about a forest? How do you guys survey a forest?
There's now it's somewhat easier with satellites, because we can, the forest kind of impacts on that, but the technology is getting better so that it works better in forests. But basically you have to traverse through the forest, and sometimes you're looking for evidence someone else traversed through it before. We found like cut lines, or they used to put blazes on the trees, things like that. So
as long as the tree doesn't fall down, it'll still be there.
That's right.
What else? Like what else is a creative way to survey a forest? I mean, back in the day, would they be dragging the chain?
Back in the day, they definitely would. So now we're able to, if there's a clearing nearby, we're able to use GPS, which is the satellite surveying, and determine the location close by, and then maybe traverse a short distance into the bush to find the monument, something like that. So that helps us a great deal. So instead of having to go through 1,000 feet of bush, maybe you are able to walk out and find a clearing, and then only go a few meters or a few 100 feet.
Depending on the season, does that affect what you guys can or cannot find?
Snow can make it more difficult, but sometimes winter is better because maybe the property is a little swampy, and it's a lot easier to traverse in the wintertime than it is in the summer, and a lot less buggy, I'm sure.
And is mapping out a subdivision of similar characteristic to mapping out anything else, or does that change?
I'd say it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm not sure where you're going with that. Sorry.
So I mean, to actually lay it out, because I mean, you guys not only just find the boundaries of maybe a farm, but as that begins to get developed, you guys have to map out where the individual lots would be, and the right of ways and so on, the roads.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the design phase, which we're involved in somewhat. So we provide the base information to planners and designers to create where the lots and maximize the use and of their property.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into that. Let's talk about the process there. So we found the lot, we found the boundaries. Now we're working within those boundaries to create something that's usable.
Yes.
Right. What does that process look like?
So then the main things are going to be the physical restrictions, which you're going to want to have the elevations of the property, what slopes there are there, what's usable land. It's also very important to know if with the floodplains or any restrictions from conservation authorities.
Okay.
That you want to define those as early as you can. Sometimes that involves having the conservation authority come and walk the site with you, and we survey that limit and then negotiate where the limit's going to be based on
like
that walk.
Stable top of bank or
those
like
type
that?
of things. the drip line of vegetation and stable top of bank, those things.
What else would you note? And this is on a topographic survey, correct?
Yes.
What else would you note on a topo?
So one of the most important things with topographic survey is what datum you're working with, because all of the restrictions that you're going to be impact your property are relative to a certain datum. So that's what
like
height
geodetic
it is.
reference
Like it's
kind
just
of thing?
it's just what the geodetic reference is.
Yeah.
Which the public would say surveyors like to change that a lot. The geodometers or the geodesists come up with a new model of what the Earth looks like, so then they change the numbers. So
Really?
So recently, there's most conservation authorities are.
Can you imagine? You're like mid-survey and someone's like, no. You're 8 feet higher than you thought. Or you're 2 feet lower.
Well, yeah, which can happen.
Oh my gosh.
That's, the local conservation authorities were using the datum of the day, which I think up till recently was basically the last time it was adjusted was 1978.
Right.
And then now most of them are using or starting to switch to the 2013 model.
Okay.
Which is more accurate and based on more satellite information, and it gives a better picture of where the actual elevations are. So some of it is a significant difference. So.
I've seen on some surveys they're using transformer pads, concrete pads for transformers, hydro, things like that as a geodetic reference. Have you seen that?
That's more of a local benchmark for the site, but yes, it's helpful for you if you're developing your property to have something local on your site that you know what the elevation is and you know where it came from.
So when something changes over time, like if 8 feet would obviously be a bit of a stretch, but let's just say, there's 1 foot of change between one reference point and another. I mean, like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, well, that's why it's important to know what datum you used and where you got that from. So there's a whole bunch of control points around the province that are have a known elevation on them, and then when they do change that model, they input those into the model and give you what the new modern elevation is. So those are available publicly to get what the elevation is and what datum it is. So then that's what's important to look on your survey when it says what
referencing
datum it used. So if it used Geodetic Survey of Canada 1928 adjusted 1978, that's what you want. Or if it says that it's relative to the new height 2013 datum, then you want to make sure that the restriction you're going to be, like for example, the floodplain is in that same datum. Yeah. Because the difference is significant there. It's around 40 centimeters in this area. So so that can impact your site.
Yeah, especially like if you got like a beach, for example, a really low slope beach. I mean, 40 centimeters on a low slope could translate to hundreds of feet. Yes. In terms of distance.
Yes.
Wow.
So.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so from the technical side, we're kind of merging into the technical side here. I'm really excited about this because I don't think enough people talk about the technical side of land planning such that they could have an educated conversation when they look at a survey. So if we start with the types of title, absolute title. I came across a property that I purchased recently and it had absolute title. A previous surveyor, who you know very well, did that survey and he converted to absolute title. What is absolute title and what does it mean in this day and age?
So absolute title is just a further level of the guarantees that the government offers for the title of the land. I guess it's more of your lawyers can tell you more what the entitlements are, but basically it guarantees that you have title to that property, and if there is an issue, the government has a fund that you can apply to fix the problem.
Really?
So that's the Land Title Assurance Fund.
No way.
So that's kind of the thing. But for development, the key with knowing what the title of your property is, as far as absolute or not, is if you're going to develop with either a plan of subdivision or a condominium, it needs to be in land titles absolute to start with. So that can create a surprise if you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
And a delay, but because it takes 6 months to a year to convert. So
Really?
it can be a bit of a delay. But
Have you gone through the process?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's that look like?
So basically, it involves a surveyor and a lawyer. So the surveyor will survey the property and they are concerned with the extent of the property, and they do the normal survey that you'd get. It's basically just a reference plan and describes the property, and then but the extra I guess guarantee is that plan is circulated to all the neighbors and adjacent owners that might have interests.
Yeah.
And then they're given the opportunity to object to the boundary and point out any issues that they may have. So it kind of gives you more of an assurance that once it's gone through that process, that this is going to be you're not going to change
this is
anymore.
It. Yeah. This is your yard.
This is your size. That's right. But basically it's for development purposes. It's more if you're doing a plan of subdivision or a condominium that you want to make sure and do that process.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be terrible? You go through, you do all of your planning work, and you're not an absolute, and then somebody objects to the farm. They're like, "Oh, geez, this was my fence line," or something happens. You're like, "Oh my gosh."
Yes.
You got to go back.
Yeah. Then it can create an impact on some of the lots adjacent or something like that. We have had that happen. So.
Really? How does that differ from something like qualified land titles or whatever? There's a few of them, right?
So yeah,
absolute
qualified land titles is just they converted it into the land titles system, which is basically just it's a little easier to. It's just like an easier package to store where the documents are. Is kind of the best way to describe it.
Okay.
So land titles qualified means it's everything's stored in the parcel, like in one place, as opposed to registry office. Everything for the whole lot would be stored in that filing cabinet, so to speak. So you'd have hundreds of
the physical filing cabinet.
Yeah, so you'd have hundreds of documents, and you have to sort through them all and figure out which deed's which and which one applies to your property.
Yeah.
Whereas when they convert it to land titles, each property has an identified number, a PIN number, that all the information stored in that parcel page. Right. So it makes it a lot easier to...
And you can look that up digitally.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the difference from land registry to land titles?
Basically, that's the difference is the registry, everything, it's just a list of registered documents. It's kind of why it's registry system.
Yeah.
So it is organized in abstract books that were like what lot it was. So the lot and concession. So every parcel that was created within that lot until it changed to a different legal description by registered plan or something would be stored in that same page and just basically in order of date. So searching to find out what deed you're looking for can be quite a process.
Yeah, no doubt.
Whereas in land titles, everything's under the one property, which is your PIN number, so your property identifier number.
And that's a profession, isn't it? A title searcher?
Yeah.
Like that's a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
To go digging through the records and like find out that particular information or the information on that house.
Yeah.
Or that lot.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that was it was kind of part of the puzzle that you would start with, is especially in a lot and concession, is you'd need to go through all the different deeds and find out which parcels were severed off and what you're left with. So
how did the conversion affect real property, or did it?
I think that it makes it a lot easier to find your documents is the main reason that they did that. And then every property in Ontario has an identified PIN number, so therefore you can find everything you need to know about it in one place. So
do you ever end up with some like ambiguous property that nobody really owns but everybody owns, but it's some weird parcel that just got never surveyed? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, there are some parcels like that.
Yeah.
That's one thing to note now, that they've gone through everything and converted most of the properties. If your property was left in registry, it's a good clue that you're going to have some issues.
Just by default, it's coming up.
If it's in registry, then likely there's some reason and there's some problem that you're going to have to deal with.
Why would that be?
It can be conflicting descriptions. It can be deeds that don't match each other. Can be not solid title. From your lawyer's perspective, they'd be able to go through and help you with that.
Can you get title insurance on something still in registry?
Yeah, I think they offer title insurance still.
Really?
So that does help. Title insurance can solve those issues for you later. I think as long as you discover the issue after you buy it.
You ever, like, in my experience, title insurance is there to like resolve something simple like unpaid property taxes when you transfer ownership, or like a hot water tank rental or something. I never actually had to go down the path of a title issue per se, but I mean, you've probably been in the situation.
Yeah, we have been. And historically, title insurance didn't turn out to be that great for surveyors. What happened was they marketed it as a replacement for a survey when that wasn't what it was. Yeah. So that kind of used to be a survey would be made on most real estate transactions. Yep. But then it was marketed to replace a survey because you just get this insurance and they'll deal with the problems. But what they didn't say is you still have to get a survey to find out the problems. So.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So,
but the good thing is that a lot of people have had good experiences with title insurance and had their problems that they discovered due to those issues that I mentioned of descriptions that don't match or overlapping things solved through title insurance.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, let's change gears here. Units of measurement: meets, bounds, minutes, hours, chains, acres, and GPS. What is a minute? What is an hour? And how does that differ from something like GPS?
Yeah, well, the degrees, minutes, and seconds, that's
degrees, minutes, and seconds, there.
So that's going to be, when you look on your survey, they show the direction of the line. Okay. So that is from north to east or north to west normally. So it's north 17 degrees, 38 minutes, and 20 seconds or something.
Hang on, whoa.
That's just the direction.
Say this again. Minutes, degrees, and seconds. How do you read that again?
So it's just... it used to be like the same as the compass. It was the magnetic bearing of the line, but it's more the astronomical line. So it's just it's basically just a different reference. But north is 0, and then 90 is east. So you go north to east, and it's just the direction of the line.
Based on what reference point?
Based on the meridians. So the latitude and longitude runs north and south.
Interesting. And they would tell all of that by a compass back in the day?
Because what they would do is use either a sun observation or a star observation. Really? And determine what the direction is. And then, because their theodolites are very expensive, they wouldn't always use those. They'd transfer it to, they'd use a known line, and then they'd use their compass to determine the direction, and then they'd go over and survey along the line.
Really? What's a theodolite?
That's some of the other problems that I mentioned earlier that you're trying to recreate, is they would be using a compass to run the line. So their first running is using the compass. Right. And if they ran into some, maybe some rock that had some magnetic interference,
like a piece of granite or something,
something like that, then the line would no longer be straight because they would be following the compass.
Oh my goodness.
But if they place the monuments along that line, then that's where the line is. So that's part of the interesting part.
This is like going back to the pyramids.
Yeah, kind of.
Holy smokes. Interesting. How would that differ from GPS today? Like GPS is bang on, no?
Yes and no, I guess.
Oh, is there variance in GPS?
Well, it is. The GPS is very good for surveyors to measure the same as a tape is. We measure between 2 points very accurately. Okay. Measuring to one coordinate on the whole Earth is relatively difficult still. So like the coordinate you see on there, it's relative to usually it's relative to control monuments or things like that, but it is accurate. But the GPS we use is now it's accurate relative to another point. So, but the modern ones that we use have a live radio link to a known point. So it gives you the difference all the time and automatically calculates it.
Do you have to set up something on that data point?
In the past, but not anymore now. Yeah. Now the manufacturers put them on at a bunch of different places, and then they're always collecting what the differences are, and then broadcast that. Because the thing is, the The difference is it varies depending on what the ionosphere does and a whole bunch of different things. So it can move around a bit.
Yeah.
So they broadcast that difference, and then automatically in our software it applies it so that we're always relative to that correct.
Really?
So it is very accurate now.
Yeah.
But it is not just the same as the GPS that's on your watch or something like that.
It's not a TomTom. You
It's
can't
not a
just walk
TomTom.
around with a Garmin, like you're on the
Yeah.
golf course.
So-
If somebody was to find one of these geodetic references, could you find it like a geocache? Like, is it a...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How would you do that?
Yeah. You can enter if you go on the published websites that show what the monuments are and what their coordinates are,
Mm-hmm.
it lists it in different things. So there's in Latin long, which is the latitude and longitude, which is what the GPS is going to read.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's different datums that show it's hard to explain, I guess, but it's it changes it into plain coordinates, like a number, like you'd normally see like in math class where you'd have
Sure.
X and a Y.
Mm-hmm.
So those are different projections that they put on and then give you coordinates that are numbers like that. So
Wow.
if you see the numbers on our plans now are all referenced to UTM, which is Universal Transverse Mercator System,
Mm-hmm.
which is what most things are. And you'll see the coordinates are like 4,800,000 something meters, and then 600,000 meters is typical around here.
Yep.
That number is a UTM coordinate. So you can type that into your
Wow.
Garmin GPS, and,
Yeah, and it'll take you there.
It'll take you there.
Holy smokes.
Yep.
What's a chain?
So a chain is 66 feet.
Right.
And it was an actual chain, which was 100 links, and it was very heavy, and
Dragging a chain around through the
dragging
bush.
it through the woods, and it was an interesting. I have some in my office, but
Do you
I've
really?
never actually used one.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
obviously, but now what we call a chain is more like what you would see us have is a typical steel tape measurement.
Yep.
Yeah.
How big would that chain have actually been? Are we talking like jeweler size? Are we talking something you tie your boat with?
It's probably maybe a little bigger than 1/8 of an inch diameter, and the links were about 6 inches long. So,
Wow. Are these
Yeah.
considered antiques now?
oh, definitely,
Yeah. So you wouldn't like drag it out to a job site and
No, I don't.
use
think,
it?
I don't think so.
Oh, the chain's stretched. Oh, geez.
That's right.
In terms of chains and farms, it's my understanding that a farm is typically 100 chains wide, a 200-acre farm, and 125 chains deep, something like that.
Yeah, it depends on
Or
the
25 chains wide.
depends
or
on
something?
the township system that it's in. And
Okay.
things like that. So
Okay.
there's
And,
different ones that have different sizes,
and this is going
but
back
that's
to like
typical.
the crown.
It's going back to the original township lot. Yeah. So,
Okay. Typical 200-acre parcel,
Yeah, typically, yeah.
generally.
Generally.
Okay. And that's what forms lots and concessions, no?
Yes.
Okay. How does that work?
Yeah, well, in Ontario, we surveyed before settlement. So they decided to lay out the province as a grid, and they did lots and concessions. So lots run east-west, or, well, depending on where you are. Here they are east-west. And concessions are run north-south. So as you go north, it goes from broken front concession, because some of them, there wasn't enough left over, so it wasn't a full
To make up a full
depth.
parcel?
So they
Yeah.
call it a broken front concession. But then as you go north, it's concession 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the lots usually run 1 to 30, so something like that. So,
So when they take all of those and they say, okay, here's, this is a township from, maybe one farm, and then they've got 10 or 15 or 20 farms, and then that's the edge of a township. How do they decide where an urban center might be? When you look at all of the surveying and all of the lots and all that, how do they decide, like, this is where Toronto's going to be, or this is where, Mississauga is going to be located, or so on? How do they pick?
yeah, I'm not sure how they did that. It was probably based on whatever resources were there back before settlement.
Would
I
that
would
have been
think.
predicated based on anything related to
now
surveying?
they,
Or is it just
I
like
don't-
convenience? Like,
Yeah, I think
the
it-
water's there. We'll go to there.
I think it's probably just convenience. By the time the surveyors got here, I think most of those cities were already sort of here. So
When did planning bylaws come into effect?
Yeah, I'm not the date. I don't know, but
Not sure.
yeah.
Would this be pre-1867 or post-1867 in the modern way that we know
Yeah, in
it?
the modern way, it would be in the 50s and 60s that we had modern planning and legislation.
So what would have happened before that? Just like the Wild West?
Yeah, maybe. They describe it that way. I've read things that describe this. Surveyors would know what lands were the best because they were on site. So they would always market the king, maybe I should ask for these lots.
Oh, really? Wow.
Things like that. So
Wow. Surveying easements and right-of-ways. We talked about it a little bit earlier today. What does that look like, and what does that mean for a landowner?
yeah, so that's another important part of the initial search is to check your title and note whether you're subject to an easement or whether you're entitled to, which is together with an easement. So that's just basically a right in another person's property.
Sure.
So you may have, the most common is like a shared driveway, I would say, where there's two lots and the driveway goes up between them and they each share 10 feet of driveway or whatever size it would be. And they each have a mutual right-of-way over half of the driveway
Right.
in favor of each other.
Right.
So that's what the most common thing that you would see.
And don't they talk about, in the actual easement itself or the right-of-way, don't they talk about what you can use it for?
Yes.
Because I've seen some, it's like, you can't drive on it, but you can run your cattle across or something like that.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Some
of these are so
of
funny.
the wording is funny.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, you want to check when if you go on your parcel page, it'll say in the description subject to easement, and it usually lists an instrument number, and you'd be able to get that instrument number from the registry office and read what it says, that you're subject to your neighbor being able to drive his car over it or whatever. Some of them are very specific.
Some of them are hilarious. They're so funny.
Yep. Some of them have been, for carrying water or I don't know what other funny.
Okay, next one here, boundary disputes. So we talked about the fences, someone moves a stake. Any other stories that you have related to boundary disputes and how you solve that?
Yeah, I would say in my experience that most of the boundary disputes I've been involved with have been basically their neighbor disputes. The boundary is actually not in dispute.
Oh, really?
The
It's just
boundary,
upset people.
It's just the two people don't get along or they want to make the fight about some particular thing.
Sure. Who resolves
most
that?
times.
Is that a lawyer thing?
Basically, it always comes down to a judge is the only one that can resolve the boundary issue. And a surveyor, our job is to provide an opinion of where the boundary is, and the opinion is to be relied on by the public. So that's our job is just to provide an opinion of where it is, but the opinion is not just it's based on a professional standard, and the expectation is that the public can rely on it.
Yeah. So I know one situation specifically where somebody has a survey of their property. It does not have a right-of-way or an easement on it. The adjacent neighbor has a survey of their property. It does have a right-of-way or an easement on it. How do you resolve a situation like that where one neighbor says, no, it's not here, and the other says, yes, it is?
Yeah, well, that's part of getting the survey is to find out if any of those things exist on the ground.
Yeah.
But the most important part to remember for easements and rights in title is that it's to deal with your lawyer and make sure that they're the experts to find out what your rights are and what other people's rights are in your property, and they'll do that based on what title documents they can find,
Right.
and whether or not that right may exist even if it's not registered. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
What would supersede the oldest possible survey? It's not my property, so I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, it depends on what. In order to have an easement, again, it's the lawyer's venue, but I can say what my opinion of it is.
Sure.
But the important thing is you need to have both the subject to, so that's the person that agreed to have the easement over their property, and the other part is together with. So you need to have both parts of someone has to enjoy the right and someone has to have the right over that property.
Subservient to.
So it's subservient interests. So
What's a lot of record?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Lot of record? No?
No.
I've seen that in some zoning bylaws where they define what a lot of record is. Like I've seen it in some circumstances where maybe a parcel is in the floodplain, for example, or close to a body of water. There used to be a house there. The house came down. It was historically a lot of record, but at some point it had merged with another parcel, and whatever happened. I've heard of people going back and saying, hey, there used to be a lot line here. We're going to put that lot line back based on an old survey. You ever heard of something like this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't heard of that specifically, but it makes sense to me. I've had it for an addition or for some kind of finding a foundation or something on your property can be an advantage, because I've had people get some assistance with their development fees because there was a existing structure there. Yeah. And we found it and located it and put it on our survey.
How much of a foundation would you have to find to legitimize the claim? Like there's one block, or like the laterally supported wall.
It was more than one block, but it was less than what I would expect.
Hilarious, really.
Yeah, in this case, which it worked out. But
and that played out in their favor.
It played out in their favor. So.
Holy smokes! Yeah. What did that allow them to do, as opposed to what would have had to happen if that wasn't there?
I think in the case that I dealt with, it was about the development charges more. So it was significant savings due to that.
Yeah. Fee simple ownership here in Ontario versus any other type of ownership. Do you guys deal with ownership at all?
Again, it's more of the lawyer's venue for that, but fee simple is basically you own the title of the property, not just an interest in it.
Right.
So.
Are there any other types of ownership in Canada?
There are some, yeah.
What would they be?
There's like the life interest, so you have interest in it as long as you're living.
Living.
And then it can go away.
Huh.
So there's some places where we had that was allowed to do like a granny flat or something like that, to have your aging parents have a parcel in the backyard or something like that. And they allowed a life interest.
Really?
For that, yeah.
Wow. Any others that you can think of?
Yeah, not off the top of my head.
Not off the top of your head. We're going deep here. Improved versus unimproved road allowance. What do these mean?
So, in the township system, every certain number of lots, there'll be a road allowance that was created. So the parcel is there and it is a road allowance, but it may not be improved as it doesn't have a road on it. It may be full of trees, and the municipality may not ever improve it, or they may. So in some cases, that land has been available or made available to the adjacent landowners. And
like they can buy it.
So the municipality is able to close that road and then offer the half to each owner.
Really?
And they kind of have like the right of first refusal.
Okay.
So that if the neighbor doesn't want it, then you can take the whole thing or something like that. So
do they have to pay fair market value? Is it appraised? How does that work?
I think there is a appraisal,
and
I think that's the way the municipality works it.
Why can't you just open the road? Like if you open that road, that gives you more road frontage, which would open up more opportunities.
Sometimes the municipality will do that, open the road, and they sometimes make that as part of the development. Is that you, lucky developer, get to help the municipality.
There's the highest and best use case, right?
I don't know if it's highest and best case for the municipality, but sometimes it's to your advantage if you build a road anyway. So it can allow you to have some extra property that's used for lots as opposed to road, if the municipality will do that. So, yeah.
A few more here. As-built survey versus topographic survey versus grading plan, art plan, and plan of subdivision. So if we go down the road here, what is an as-built survey? And then we'll progressively add in the rest as we go.
So I think I would call it
or as constructed.
Kind of what your initial survey for development is. Like it's kind of like what your to start your development, I'd say you're best off to get a plan of survey that shows topography. So that shows all the existing conditions.
Okay.
It's going to show the boundary of the property, any interests, any easements, physical features, things like that. So you're going to know everything about your property before you start developing.
Right.
When you talk about as-built survey, I'm not sure. I think what you're looking for is once you've gone through the process, put a house on it, some municipalities require an as-built survey to show that the foundation that you've built is in the correct location and meets the zoning bylaws before you go ahead and complete the house.
Grading plan.
So a grading plan that is created to ensure that the water that you're creating on the property is dealt with within your own property and doesn't impact your neighbors negatively. So surveyors and engineers create plans that show where that groundwater is going to go once the house is built.
Right.
And how it's going to stay within your property and not impact your neighbors. That's the basic design of it.
Our plan. What's in our plan?
So a reference plan is what basically it replaces a meets and bounds description from the past. So instead of having words that sometimes are confusing, you get to have a picture, which is supposed to be more clear. So it's a survey that defines a new piece of property usually it's by severance, something like that. So which a reference plan, basically it serves as the description of the property.
Within a plan of subdivision?
It can be within a plan of subdivision or in a lot and concession. It's basically describing a property within existing lot fabric.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the difference.
Yeah.
Plan of subdivision creates new lot fabric. So that's kind of the difference is if you a reference plan works within the existing description. So if you had a block on an M plan, then you divide that block. The property is still described as block number 6 and then being part 1 on this plan. That's kind of the description. Whereas a subdivision, if you were going to subdivide part of the lot in concession, when you have your new description, the property is now described as 40M 1423.
Right.
And a lot on that. So it creates a new fabric and erases the old fabric. It's kind of the difference.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. That's super technical, but so important. I mean, to understand what parcel you have, what are you creating? If somebody ever went to look up the PIN, they'll find that.
Yes. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, 2 more here. Riparian rights. I'm so interested in riparian rights, whether it's cottages or farming or whatever. As a surveyor, what do you guys know about riparian rights, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah. It's an interesting area of study for sure.
I actually think I even called you about this like a year or 2 ago.
Yeah.
What's this riparian rights?
Probably. So basically the important part again is history. It's history of what the water was when the lot was created. That's what kind of defines where the water, if it's riparian, it's always riparian. So if the lot was created and went to the water when
to
the original township was made, then as that water moves or recedes, your boundary is going to change based on that. So it makes it relatively simple because if you get wet, you're on the other property, and if you're dry, you're on your property. So that's fairly straightforward. But the problem is that a lot of lakes are flooded. So then that creates, you need to find out what the historical elevation of that was. And if the flooding wasn't natural, then the boundary may not be the water in that case. And the other part of water boundaries is a lot of the lakes in Ontario have shore road allowances. So they actually didn't go to the water. They went to a place that was about 1 chain away from the water at that time.
Oh, wow.
So then the part of that is you buy your cottage and you think that you go into the water, but you may not.
Right.
And I've found a lot of cases where the boathouse or the bunkie or sometimes the cottage is located on that road allowance. And usually it's not a problem because it's no one else is going to use it and it's not going to use it. But the problem occurs when there's something like a fire and the insured property. So if it's not on the right property, then your insurance can cause issues and things like that. So a lot of the municipalities are closing those road allowances and selling them to the owners.
Do they take any little bit of land back so that you don't own right to the water's edge still, or do they give you right to the water's edge?
That's part of the fun of those properties. Right. Is a lot of those lakes are flooded, and the actual water's edge that is somewhat further into the lake. So there isn't 66. Sometimes there isn't 66 feet to the water. So then often the municipalities only sell from the present water's edge to the shore river allowance.
Wow.
So, yeah. But even if the other thing to remember is even if you own to the water or you own into the water because of flooded lands, that land is controlled by some other interest because the government is in control of the navigation over that water.
Right.
So you may not be able to like build a retaining wall and reclaim that land without a lot of permissions. So
if you have land that's added through land accretion, like the dirt builds up on your property and it slowly continues out, would you then theoretically own that dirt?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, if it's slow and imperceptible.
Yeah.
Then the accretion adds
imperceptible. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Like it happens over a period of 50 years.
Yeah.
So what happens if a hurricane comes through and
then it's a little less clear. So
a little less clear.
Then it's not. Then you're into retracing where the water was.
Right.
More natural, but
yeah. Let's say you have a house on a spit of land, right? And a hurricane comes through and it wipes out half the spit of land, such that now you have a little bit on the mainland and an island.
Yeah.
Can you put it back? Now you don't own the lake bed, right? The government owns the lake bed.
Yeah, there can be some problems there.
We'll check here,
right? I have one that's ongoing that's
really
doing that right now.
Can you talk about it?
Where it's not really a contentious issue, but it's there was a causeway, and the person had a right of way over that causeway to get their property, but then they decided the causeway wasn't the best thing at some time, and they removed the causeway, built a bridge instead.
Yeah.
So now there's water in between, and it's an island, so it
really
creates a bit of difference.
And then it would be navigable, theoretically, which means it's 2 pins.
Yeah, theoretically it can be.
Huh.
But.
Okay, lastly, mineral rights. Do you guys get into mineral rights at all?
Other than noting that they're on the parcel, I haven't had any real experience with that.
Where do you find that?
But it's on the parcel and says that it's subject to, sometimes the Crown retained the mineral rights and they could use them. And so other times they didn't. So it's usually on your title.
Really?
Yeah.
So if you look up an in-town lot, I mean, there's like surface rights or surface use rights by default, but not necessarily mineral rights down below versus maybe a rural lot. Like how would you know?
I think you'd only know if it's, you need to go back to the original patent, but usually that's carried forward. If there is some kind of restriction where they retained the mineral rights, it is usually on the pin. So
right on the pin.
Yeah.
Wow. As an instrument or something.
Usually it'll be right in the header. It'll say that it's subject to the mineral rights or the reservation of the mineral rights, which is part of the when you do read your parcel description, you want to make sure that you, like, as far as going back to the road allowances, some of them, that's the way it was stated. It was a reservation of the road allowance in words, so sometimes it's not evident if you looked at the township map or something. But if you looked at the original patent, it would say that it's they reserved the 1 chain width road allowance for logging rights or whatever it was. So,
wow, interesting. Because I mean, you can get mineral, you can get aggregate, you can get trees like lumber.
I've seen that where the certain kind of pine trees were reserved.
So is this why you need a well permit to take the water from the ground? Is that some kind of a tied-in thing with the titles for the government, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's another, like, it's because it can be an interest in your neighbor, I would think, because you can't just draw all the water out in one spot.
Man,
definitely.
This has been a very educational episode for sure. I know the listeners will get insane value from this. To have you here in studio has been such a joy for me. I'm like inside, I feel so warm and fuzzy. The fact that A, we were able to meet in person after all these years, and B, I mean, the knowledge bombs that you dropped today have just been over the top. So from me to you, thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks for the invite, and I appreciate the time as well.
Where can people find out more about you or IBW Surveys?
Yeah, if they want to find out more about us, we have on our website, ibwsurveyors.com. And like I mentioned, we have offices that stretch from Parry Sound right out to Cornwall. So
fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks again for listening to the Highest and Best Use podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. Don't forget to sign up to the book at thehighestandbestuse.com. Like, share, follow, and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode.